Okay, moving on. From lesson 2, hunter-gatherers. Let's see, we left off with the agricultural revolution, domestication of animals. Food gatherers noticed that grain sprouted from spilled seed. Bit, not hard to figure out after you've been looking at it for a while. Around 8000 BC, 10,000 years ago, people got the idea of agriculture, or planting seeds to raise crops. There's your definition. Agricultural revolution is the name given to the shift from food gathering to food raising. Agricultural revolution is the name given to the shift from food gathering to food raising. Big difference. Growing your own food as opposed to wandering around forever looking for it. Good thing to know. The agricultural revolution brought about changes in tools and technology. Okay, changes in tools and technology. People made hoes to loosen the soil, sticks to dig holes, and sickles to harvest grain. Remember in lesson 1, people are using spears to kill animals and things like that. Okay. Early farmers practiced slash and burn agriculture. They cut and then burned trees and brush to clear land for crops. After a number of growing seasons, soil often became poor. People then moved to a new location. If you're familiar with farming, crops are going to pull nutrients out of the soil in order to maintain their health. And after a while, they're going to use up all those nutrients that are in the soil. And then slash and burn agriculture, what people do is they just kind of move to another area and they do the same thing all over again until that soil's depleted. So review, what was the impact of new tools on early humans? Settlements begin. Essential question, why did villages develop? Good question. If people are nomadic, they're wandering around, they're looking for food, there's no reason to stay in one place for very long, especially if they're following animals that they're hunting. But at some point, villages started to develop, and it has to do with agriculture. People learned to be better farmers as their tools improved. Groups often remained in the same areas instead of moving around every few years. They began to develop permanent settlements. Farming villages develop. Fertile soil produced bigger and better crops. This attracted farmers. River valleys had soil that was especially rich. Their soil was better than that in the fields that had been cleared by slashing and burning. Farmers settled in villages and went out to the fields to work. Villages grew to hold several thousand people. People lived in shelters made of mud, bricks, logs, and hides. And remember, during hunter-gatherer times, before 10,000 years ago, people lived in groups of no more than about 30 people. So, big difference. We already talked about the map. Village life provided many advantages. Food was more plentiful. People living in larger groups could more easily withstand attacks by nomadic bands. That would be groups of people who are still nomadic. And maybe they're, you wander around looking for food all day long and you don't find any, and you come across a group of people who do have food, that could end badly. But if you walk into a village with 1,000 people and you're a band of 30 people, you're not going to have a whole lot of success taking the food away from those people. Village life also had disadvantages, including the risks of fire, disease, and flood. Keep in mind, especially disease, when you're living in close proximity to a lot of people, somebody gets a cold, what happens? Everybody gets a cold. Okay, review. How did farming change the way people lived? If you're not sure, go back over and review the video. Farming develops in many places. Essential question number 3, where did farming develop? Scroll this down a little bit. About 8000 BC, which would be, if we take the year 2017, which is what we're in, so we're 2017 years beyond the year 0, this is going back in time, so if you take 8,000 and you add 2,000 years onto it, then we're about 10,000 years ago. People in different parts of the world began to develop farming. Early farmers invented new methods of farming. River valleys in Africa and Asia. Early farming developed in areas where water was available, such as in river valleys. These included the Huanghe in China and the Nile in Africa. African farmers along the Nile were among the first to use irrigation, or the watering of crops. What is irrigation? It's the watering of crops. They built irrigation systems of dikes and canals. Uplands in the Americas. Farming in the Americas developed later than in the rest of the world. It developed mainly in upland regions, plateaus, and other flat areas at fairly high elevations. Farmers in the Americas developed techniques suited to the environment. The terracing of land to create flat areas helped adapt the land for raising crops such as corn, beans, potatoes, and squash. Review. What crops did early farmers raise in the Americas? Well, right there, right above is where the answer to that is. Lesson summary. After the Ice Age, humans learned to domesticate animals and plant crops. Important. As people learned to be better farmers, farming villages developed. Farming developed independently in many parts of the world. And why do we care about this now? The development of farming led to a great increase in human population. Today, most people depend on agriculture for their food. In some parts of the world, such as Africa and India, most people are still farmers who live in villages. Obviously, most people are not nowadays farmers, but we do depend on agriculture in order to get our food. Otherwise, we're growing it ourselves or hunting and gathering, and it's kind of hard to do with so many people on the planet nowadays. All right. That completes lesson 2 on, scrolling back up, learning to farm and raise animals. There you go.